It was just after midnight when the world seemed to stop. Phones buzzed, social media exploded, and within moments, the rumor turned into a heartbreaking truth. Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness, was gone. For millions of fans around the world, it felt like the end of an era. But for his bandmates, especially Tony Iommi, it was something deeper. It was the loss of a brother. Tony was in Birmingham when he got the call. He didn't say much. He just sat quietly, staring at the wall. The man he had formed Black Sabbath with, the man he had fought with, laughed with, and grown old with, was no more. "I can't believe he's gone," Tony whispered later that day. "Ozzy wasn't just my friend. He was part of my soul." The rock community reacted fast. Sharon Osbourne released a short, shaking message. "My heart is broken into 1,000 pieces. I've lost my husband. The world has lost a legend. But to me, he was always just my Ozzy." Within hours, tributes poured in. From Metallica to Paul McCartney, everyone had something to say. Slash called him the wild heart of heavy metal. Dave Grohl posted a picture of himself at age 15, holding a Black Sabbath vinyl. Underneath, it simply read, "Without you, I wouldn't exist." But the most emotional message came from Tony Iommi. He posted a picture of him and Ozzy from 1972, arms around each other, grinning like kids. His caption, "We started in the dirt, and we climbed to the stars. I'll never stop hearing your voice, brother. Rest now. I'll carry the riff for both of us." Fans started gathering outside Ozzy's old home in Aston. Candles, handwritten notes, and Sabbath posters filled the street. One sign said, "Ozzy taught me how to feel alive." Another, "Long live the madman." But behind the tributes and the tears, there was something else, a story fans didn't know yet, one that Tony had kept to himself all these years, a final conversation, a final promise. And it all started just weeks before Ozzy's death. It had been a rough year for Ozzy. His health was failing. Parkinson's, spinal issues, and years of touring had taken their toll. But what hurt more than the pain was the silence. He couldn't tour. He couldn't record. He felt trapped. Tony knew that feeling. They had talked about it during lockdown. "It's like someone pulled the power cord out," Ozzy had joked once. But there was sadness behind that laugh. Then, one day in early July, Tony's phone rang. It was Ozzy. His voice was weak but clear. "Mate, I had this dream last night," Ozzy said. "We were on stage again, playing Paranoid. You were smiling. I was flying, crowd screaming. Felt like we were 20 again." Tony laughed, holding back tears. "Maybe we will again," he said. But Ozzy paused. "No, Tony. I just wanted to hear your voice. Just in case." Tony felt his stomach drop. He knew what Ozzy meant, and for a long time neither of them said anything. Then Ozzy whispered something strange. "Do you remember the promise we made in 1979? After the fight?" Tony remembered it well. Back then, Black Sabbath was falling apart. Drugs, ego, exhaustion. It was all too much. One night, after a massive fight, Ozzy stormed out, but before he did, he turned and said, "If either of us dies before the other, the last one has to tell the real story. No lies, no cover-ups." Tony had laughed at the time, but now, hearing Ozzy remind him, he felt a heavy weight return. "You're not dying yet, Oz," he said. But Ozzy just chuckled. "Just in case, brother. Promise me." Tony agreed. And now, with Ozzy gone, the time had come to tell that story. The real one. Not the version in documentaries or books. The one only the two of them knew. In the late 70s, Black Sabbath was falling apart from the inside. Fame had made them gods, but addiction had made them strangers. Ozzy and Tony were barely speaking. Rehearsals turned into arguments. Shows turned into disasters. And finally, in 1979, the band made a brutal decision. Ozzy was out. Most fans know that part. What they don't know is what happened the night before it all collapsed. It was in a dingy hotel in Los Angeles. Ozzy had locked himself in his room, surrounded by empty bottles and memories that felt too heavy. Tony knocked on the door for hours. Finally, Ozzy opened it, eyes red, voice shaking. "I'm not angry at you, Tony," he said. "I'm angry at myself. I can't stop. I can't slow down." Tony sat down beside him, both of them too tired to yell. "We're not who we used to be," Tony said quietly. They talked through the night, about the early days in Aston, the first riffs of Iron Man, the madness of touring America, and how everything had spun out of control. That's when Ozzy made him promise. "If I die before you," he said, "tell them the truth. Not the press version, not the manager's version, the truth." Tony asked, "What truth?" "That we loved each other. That even when we hated each other, we were still brothers, and that I never wanted to leave. They pushed me out, but I always thought one day we'd be back." Tony had never told anyone that conversation, not Sharon, not even Geezer Butler. But now, standing alone in his home, staring at Ozzy's photo, he felt the time had come. He went to his shelf, pulled out a dusty old notebook. Inside were scribbled lyrics, stage plans, and that night's conversation, written down word for word. Fans would hear the truth soon, but Tony still wasn't ready to speak. First, he needed to visit one more place. The grave hadn't been made public yet, but Tony knew where to go, a private spot near Aston, where Ozzy had once said he wanted his ashes scattered. It wasn't official, but it felt right. Tony knelt beside a tree, holding the notebook. "You always said you'd haunt me if I didn't tell it right," he said with a shaky smile. "So here it is, mate. Here's the truth." But even then, the story wasn't over, because just a week after Ozzy's passing, Tony received a mysterious letter. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a message in Ozzy's handwriting. "You think this is the end? It's only the encore." The letter shook Tony to his core. He stared at it for hours, reading and rereading the 6 simple words. "You think this is the end? It's only the encore." He knew Ozzy's handwriting, the shaky curls, the way he dotted his eyes with tiny circles. It was definitely him. But how? Sharon hadn't mentioned anything. Neither had the kids. It was like Ozzy had reached out from beyond. That night, Tony couldn't sleep. He went into his home studio and picked up his guitar. For the first time since Ozzy's death, he played a riff. Slow, heavy, full of pain. But something beautiful. It wasn't just music. It was a goodbye. Or maybe a hello. The next morning, he called Geezer. "You need to hear something," he said. "Bring your bass." They hadn't recorded anything since their last tour. But now, it felt urgent. Something was pulling them back together. Tony played the riff again. Geezer added a low, haunting rhythm. It felt like Sabbath, but it also felt like Ozzy was in the room. They didn't say much, just nodded. Sharon arrived later that day with a USB drive. "Ozzy left this with the lawyers," she said quietly. "Said it was for you. One last song." Tony plugged it in. It was a vocal track. Ozzy's voice, older, worn, but unmistakable. He was singing lyrics no one had ever heard before. "When I go, don't cry for me. I'll be the scream in your melody." It was chilling, beautiful. A message from beyond the grave. Tony, Geezer, and even Bill Ward, who hadn't played with them in years, came together one final time. They built a song around Ozzy's voice. Heavy, dark, full of emotion. They didn't call it a reunion. They called it the encore. And when the world finally heard it, fans wept. For the first time since Ozzy's death, it didn't feel like an end. It felt like he had left one last piece of himself behind. A gift. A goodbye. As the final notes of the encore faded out, a recording played. It was Ozzy laughing. "Gotcha, didn't I?" The fans smiled through tears. Even in death, the madman had one last surprise.